kann mich leicht hören, man kann mich hören. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's very nice to have you all here. It's lovely that at this late hour still so many people interested in what we want to talk about tonight. I must apologize for the delay, as this is a theater festival. Arts and culture needs time and space, so maybe that's an explanation. But still, we're very delighted to have that interesting panel here. 5 very enthusiastic, very empathic and experienced journalists sitting on this stage, all from different countries, different crisis-affected countries in Europe. It's beautiful to have them here. Thank you very much already in advance. Just 2 sentences concerning my person. My name is Axel Storm. I'm a television news journalist for ZDF German TV. I'm Munich-based, but I do work internationally from time to time. And that should be enough of me. We have 5 people from Portugal, Greece, from Cyprus, from Ireland, from Spain, and Turkey, and all of them can share their personal subjective perspective of the crisis, and all of them, of course, have their journalistic views of the crisis as well. I'm not going to introduce them, they're going to introduce themselves, and we start with Mr. Ralf Socek. He's the Ireland and Great Britain correspondent for Taz, Die Tageszeitung, from Berlin. He lives in Dublin since 1985, and everything else, Ralf, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Axel. Well, you've said most of it. I've been Taz correspondent in Ireland since 1985 and doing Britain since 1988. It started off as our Britain correspondent went to Washington and they asked me to cover for 3 months in 88. Well, now it's 2013 and I'm still covering Britain from Dublin, which makes sense really because like in Dublin you obviously have British media and a lot of it's focused on Britain, so you get all the news and everything that's happening there. Most colleagues I do in Ireland from London. It's a bit more difficult because they don't really look west that much. So I think it's a good arrangement. And as a correspondent, you obviously cover everything from sports to politics, business, and especially satirical pieces, which I like most. So I've been in Ireland long enough to have experienced the bad years, the good years, and now the bad years again. Started off in the 90s when Ireland, when the government did a deal with the trade unions that they wouldn't be looking for more money, and at the same time they lowered the corporation tax to 10%. In order to attract foreign investment, they actually provided them with complete factories, and it worked for a while. You had a lot of businesses coming to Ireland. First of all, you had an English-speaking workforce, low corporation tax, a foot in the EU. So Ireland, it was called the Celtic Tiger then, with growth rates of up to 10% for years. But then I think it was in 2001, Dell came to Ireland, and Dell was the last big company that settled in Ireland, and was the first one to go with them as well. And the government decided that it's great to live off the tax that they generated by selling houses. With other words, they thought we could get richer and richer by selling houses to each other. And so the building boom was absolutely crazy. The government worked together with the building companies and the banks, so you could build houses and get tax breaks. So they were building, and in the end, nobody really needed the houses. Of course, everybody thought, well, it can't go on forever, apart from the government. And in 2008, we had the crash. And the result is now that you have about 300,000 empty houses. You have thousands of ghost estates, which means they're less than 50% occupied. And I went to see one there just before Halloween. I mean, it was really Halloween on top of it. There was one street where they had a skeleton at one door for Halloween, and the rest of the street was empty. There was one family living there. I was speaking to them, and they know that they never get out of it again because they paid the full price. Then the prices came down, and unless they win in the lottery, they'll be stuck there forever. In an estate where hardly anybody lives, no infrastructure, half-finished houses, building sites, dangerous for children, and it's just awful. And of course, it had a lot to do with corruption as well. Irish politicians took a lot of money for, when you have agricultural land and it was changed into building land for houses, they got millions from the builders in order to vote yes to change the agricultural land to building land, and a lot of it was found out. But on the other hand, nothing happens to those people. I don't think anybody had to go to jail for that. What really happened then in 2008? Merrill Lynch is the American investment bank. They published a report in April, I think it was, of 2008, where they warned that the Irish banks are almost broke. Now, this report was on the internet for about 3 hours. Then it was taken off again. The guy who wrote it was sacked later. And in September 2008, Merrill Lynch came out with a new report. 7 pages, it got 7 million for that. And where it said all of a sudden, the Irish banks are well capitalized, everything is fine. And of course there was a panic in Ireland that savers would go to the banks and take their money out. So in order to stop that, they asked Merrill Lynch what to do, like if they should give a bank guarantee. And the answer was, oh yes, you should, but it shouldn't be only for the Irish savers, it should be a bank guarantee for everybody, for foreign firms as well. So at the end of September, they published that bank guarantee, and all of a sudden, we're loaded with something like 64 billion debt. Now, Merrill Lynch was one of the people who had invested in Ireland, so they had, of course, an interest in getting their money back. They interviewed one Merrill Lynch manager later, and he said he had been trying to sell the Irish papers for 6 months for half price, and nobody wanted them. So he had written them off, and then he got the phone call, bank guarantee. And he said the first thing he did, he went to his cellar and got the best bottle of champagne he had, because all of a sudden, all this worthless paper was worth a lot again. Now, 3 minutes I was told. Okay, I'll hurry.
Can I briefly interrupt you? That's very interesting to hear about the economic development of the
I'll stop with that
in Ireland. But what we would like to focus on is 2 factors. One would be how are actually Irish people, the Irish population.
I was going to come to that now.
And the second one would be a brief glimpse on what the media does in those times.
Yeah, I know. Okay, I'll hurry. In October we had the 7th austerity budget. Another 2.5 billion euro were cut. 900 million more tax, and the rest 1.6 billion cuts in whatever, social welfare and health and education, everywhere. So the growth is only 0.2% or whatever. That means up to now they've taken out 28 billion already in the last 5 years. 28 billion cuts for a country that's as small as Ireland, with 4 million people. That's an awful lot, and everybody is affected. Farmers are affected because they cut the environmental subsidies, which were up to 50% of their income, which also means that they don't do the work anymore that's involved in environmental protection, which means you're going to see whole areas that are important for tourism going to deteriorate in the next 10 years. And everybody really is affected by that, not only, but especially, of course, the low-income classes, because that's where they cut most. The media, which I don't know, I can't understand it, that there's so little critical reporting in Ireland, and okay, you have some websites, but you don't have one centralized website where everybody can discuss things or complain. Like all the different groups have their different websites. Media in Germany has been very superficial, I think, reporting on Ireland. It's very derogative too. I mean, if you think of the term pigs states like Portugal, Ireland, Spain, and Greece. But that's sort of the feeling you get when you look from Ireland into the German papers, that they almost report as if we're getting sort of, just little gifts of money and that Germany is saving Ireland. What actually is happening is that the Irish people at the moment are saving the German banks by paying back the debt that they lost speculating. Casino capitalism is the wrong word for that. Just one example, then I finish. If you say you go into a casino and you lose 20,000 euro, for example. Okay, in a casino, it would be lost. Money would be gone. Now, in this case, if you lose 20,000 euro, you go to the owner of the casino and tell him, look, I mean, I won't come back to you, and my friends won't either, to bet in your casino unless you give me back the 20,000. Well, if you haven't got it, I'll lend them to you, but for quite a high interest rate. So the owner of the casino agrees and goes to his workers in the casino and tells them, sorry lads, but I have to cut your wages. We have to pay this guy who lost the 20 grand, and he'll be annoyed if he doesn't get his money back. So you have to do with smaller wages, and also the breaks are shorter, and that's what happened basically. That we're paying for German, French, and British banks. And it's not the generous Germans who saved Ireland, really.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much for that introduction. It is a very complex topic. Every one of us knows this since 2008. Something that started with the subprime crisis in the United States became basically a worldwide financial crisis. And as you already get a glimpse of, even journalists are sometimes looking for words and expressions and metaphors to explain what's actually happening, because it's so wide-ranged and very difficult. That's why it's good that we have complete news pros on this stage. Another one would be Gonzalo Cortizo from Spain, and we hear much more about the situation in Spain, of course, than we hear about the situation in Ireland and Cyprus, for example. Why that is the case, we're going to be discussing later. But first, Gonzalo, maybe you want to say something to yourself and about the situation in Spain.
Muy bien, pues muy buenas tardes y muchas gracias. Y antes de empezar, disculparme por dirigirme a vosotros en castellano, pero estoy mucho más cómodo hablando en español que si lo intentas hacer en inglés. Supongo que se entendería bastante peor. En España también tenemos casinos. El dato de la semana pasada, y yo creo que los medios de comunicación tenemos mucha importancia en que los ciudadanos puedan manejar las cifras, puedan tocarlas y puedan entenderlas. Hemos perdido 40.000 millones de euros que les dimos a la banca y que no va a volver. Dinero que se puso en manos de un sistema bancario, en este caso el propio sistema bancario español, controlado políticamente, y quizás este sea el punto fundamental del caso español. Es que ya no solo ha sido un gran fallo del sistema, sino un gran fallo de la política y del papel de los políticos en el sistema. En este caso, un sistema de bancos, de cajas de ahorro controladas por varones locales, por fondos de determinadas zonas y que han generado un agujero financiero vinculado también al ladrillo. Y la cifra es esa, 40.000 millones de pesetas, 40.000 millones de euros, perdón, de los impuestos de los españoles en manos de la banca y un gobierno que reconoce que ese dinero nunca va a volver. Yo les quería dar algunos datos sobre mi país, pero fundamentalmente sobre mi profesión, sobre el periodismo y el periodismo en estos momentos de crisis. Desde 2008 en España han perdido su puesto de trabajo casi 10.000 periodistas. Yo soy uno de ellos. Yo perdí mi puesto de trabajo en medio de la crisis, aunque lo he recuperado y enseguida, si quieren, les explico pues cómo ha sucedido pues este milagro, ¿no?, que es trabajar siendo periodista en España. Vaya por delante que yo soy de los que opinan que el periodismo es ahora más necesario que nunca, y déjenme que les diga que creo que hay esperanza, que hay otra manera de hacer periodismo, y creo además que los ciudadanos lo están pidiendo, lo consumen, y que además eso habrá de hacernos reflexionar a todos sobre muchas cosas. Voy a esperar un momento, ¿ok? One minute.
Yeah. Can I interrupt you for a second? Sorry, we're having problems with the language at the moment because everyone, of course, needs to understand. Get what you need. Is it possible for the translator to maybe join us here and translate it publicly? So, because it's hard to communicate otherwise. Thanks. "28 member states, 500 million citizens on the continent, and still we're having language problems, of course, but we're going to get it solved now. I hope that we can ask our translator to join us on stage and help us with the translation from Spanish. So she's coming already. I'd suggest that we continue with you. Do we have a microphone? Yeah. Yes, please. Thank you very much for joining us.
Ok, pues voy a retomar desde el principio.
Also ich starte mal vom Anfang.
Y donde estén las personas, que se quite la tecnología, que parece que no.
Die Freuden der Technologie, so ist das eben mit der Technik.
Bueno, decía al inicio que en mi país también hay casinos.
Also ich habe am Anfang gesagt, in meinem Land gibt es ja auch Casinos.
Y esta pasada semana hemos conocido la cifra de cuánto nos ha costado la broma y la fiesta que hemos jugado en ese casino llamado Banca Española.
Und in der letzten Woche haben wir die genauen Zahlen kennengelernt, was uns der ganze Spaß in diesem Casino, das die spanische Bankenwirtschaft darstellt, gekostet hat.
La factura de esa broma, de esa fiesta, es de 40.000 millones de euros que pagarán los españoles de sus impuestos a una banca que ha sido completamente ineficiente en medio de una burbuja inmobiliaria como la que nos contaban en el caso de Irlanda nuestro compañero.
Also 40 Milliarden Euro, die der spanische Bürger aus seinem Steuergeld, aus seinen Taschen verschenkt hat, verspielt hat, verzockt hat. Jetzt kennen wir die Zahlen und das hat genauso mit einer Immobilienblase zu tun, von der wir gerade schon gehört haben.
Pero yo quería hoy aquí ofrecerles algunos datos sobre mi país y también sobre el periodismo en mi país.
Ich möchte Ihnen aber auch noch ein paar konkrete Daten nennen über mein Land und über das Panorama der Medien in meinem Land.
Desde 2008 en España han perdido su puesto de trabajo cerca de 10.000 periodistas.
Seit 2008 haben in Spanien rund 10.000 Journalisten ihren Job verloren.
Yo soy uno de ellos, aunque yo he recuperado mi puesto de trabajo. Enseguida les explico cómo se ha producido ese milagro.
Und ich bin einer davon, obwohl ich schon bald danach wieder einen Job gefunden habe. Das kann ich Ihnen nachher noch erklären, wie dieses Wunder zustande gekommen ist.
Vaya por delante que yo soy de los que opinan que el periodismo es ahora más necesario que nunca.
Ich denke auch, dass gerade die Arbeit der Medien, der Journalisten jetzt wichtiger und wertvoller ist denn je zuvor.
Y déjenme que les diga también que creo que hay esperanza, que hay otro modo de hacer periodismo.
Und erlauben Sie mir auch, Ihnen zu sagen, dass ich Hoffnung habe, dass ich glaube und überzeugt bin, dass es eine andere Art gibt, journalistisch in den Medien tätig zu sein.
Y además estoy convencido de que los ciudadanos lo están pidiendo, lo consumen y que todo ello habrá de hacernos reflexionar sobre muchas cosas.
Und ich bin auch absolut davon überzeugt, dass die Bürger genau danach verlangen, nach dieser alternativen Medienlandschaft, dass sie das auch konsumieren, lesen, verbrauchen und dass uns das wiederum dazu bringt, als Medienschaffende über unsere Arbeit neu nachzudenken.
Les hablaré de mi experiencia. Hasta 2011 yo trabajaba en la principal cadena de radio de España, la cadena SER.
Also bis 2011 habe ich in einer der großen spanischen Radio- und Fernsehstationen SER gearbeitet, bis 2011.
Las cosas me iban bien.
Die Dinge gingen nicht gut.
Me ocupaba de la información de política, terrorismo y tribunales.
Obwohl es mir persönlich ganz gut ging. Also das Thema war damals Politik, Terroranschläge, Justizskandale, die es gab.
Y tenía bajo mi mando una redacción de 8 personas en Madrid y una red de corresponsales en cada ciudad y cada pueblo del Estado.
Und ich habe ein großes Netzwerk von Korrespondenten in den verschiedenen Städten und Regionen Spaniens geleitet.
Por decirlo en términos informativos, si algo pasaba en cualquier parte, mi tiempo de reacción, el de mi emisora, el de mi redacción, era de apenas unos minutos.
Das heißt, egal was wo geschah, ich konnte sehr schnell reagieren und innerhalb von ganz wenigen Minuten die Nachrichten frisch auf den Tisch bringen.
Recuerdo que en una ocasión enviamos a una redactora de política argentina.
Wir haben zum Beispiel einmal eine argentinische Mitarbeiterin in dem Politikressort.
Estábamos en plena campaña electoral para dar cobertura a un acto del ahora presidente del gobierno.
Mitten in der Wahlkampagne, da ging es ganz heiß her und der jetzige spanische Ministerpräsident wollte gerade eine Rede halten.
Y como habíamos hecho las reservas con poco tiempo, tuvimos que comprar un billete de primera clase para esta redactora.
Und stellen Sie sich vor, wir mussten für diese Redakteurin, weil wir nur sehr kurzfristig da planen konnten, ein Erste-Klasse-Flugticket buchen.
Además de pagar las habitaciones en un hotel de 5 estrellas en el que se alojaba el hoy presidente del gobierno en España, Mariano.
Und außerdem mussten wir auch ein Zimmer in dem Hotel mieten, wo der jetzige spanische Ministerpräsident Mariano Rajoy abgestiegen war. Das war ein 5-Sterne-Hotel.
A mí aquello me empezaba a sorprender ya para entonces.
Das hat mich damals schon gewundert.
Sin embargo, en mi medio de comunicación, en mi empresa, era una gran empresa.
Aber mein Unternehmen, also innerhalb des Unternehmens, ein großer Konzern, Medienkonzern,
a nadie le llamó la atención que llegase una factura de 3.500 euros.
Das hat überhaupt niemand gewundert, dass die Rechnung für diese Reise der Korrespondentin 3.500 Euro betrug.
Ni siquiera se le dio importancia al hecho de que aquel trabajo solo había encontrado cabida en los informativos.
Außerdem hat niemand großen Wert darauf gelegt, dass eben dieser Bericht, den die Kollegin verfasst hatte, nur wenig verbreitet wurde in den Abendnachrichten.
Para la emisión de un pequeño corte de voz de 20 segundos tan solo en uno de los boletines de la tarde.
Nur in den Nachmittagsnachrichten gab es einen Einspieler von 20 Sekunden.
Emitir 20 segundos de voz nos había costado 3.500 euros.
Also 20 Sekunden O-Ton ist gleich 3.500 Euro Kosten.
Y si les soy sincero, no recuerdo qué cosa dijo aquel día Rajoy, creo que no era importante. Escaso medio minuto para justificar ese gasto.
Und ehrlich gesagt weiß ich gar nicht mehr, was der Inhalt der Rede von Mariano Rajoy war, aber egal was er gesagt hätte, niemals hätte es so wichtig sein können, um diese Kosten zu rechtfertigen.
Estamos ahora en 2013, las cosas han cambiado mucho desde entonces, han cambiado mucho para mí y han cambiado mucho para el periodismo.
Von damals nach heute, 2013, haben sich die Dinge extrem verändert. Für mich persönlich, für die gesamte Landschaft der Medien, für die Journalisten insgesamt.
En 2011 yo fui despedido y mi despido no fue más que una gota de un largo goteo de despidos en los grandes medios de comunicación de mi país.
2011, wie gesagt, wurde ich entlassen und das war aber nur einer der vielen tausenden Entlassungen, die in meinem Land Verheerungen angerichtet haben.
Junto a otro grupo de profesionales, hace poco más de un año, creamos un diario digital.
Mit einer anderen Berufsgruppe haben wir vor kurzer Zeit den sogenannten D-Tag, also den Digitaltag, entworfen. Wir haben eine neue Tageszeitung gegründet.
Que en cuestión de meses se ha convertido en un referente en la prensa española. No somos los únicos.
Wir sind nicht die Einzigen, aber unser El Diario ist wirklich eine Referenz geworden in den spanischen Medien.
No somos los únicos, muchos compañeros están haciendo lo mismo y estas aventuras periodísticas que están teniendo lugar en España están teniendo éxito diverso, pero están teniendo éxito y bastante acogida.
Wir sind nicht die Einzigen, die ein solches digitales Zeitungsabenteuer eingegangen sind. Viele andere Kollegen machen das auch und ich muss sagen, mit großem Erfolg, zum Glück.
Como creo que ya he dicho, mi periódico se llama eldiario.es.
Ich denke, ich habe es gerade gesagt, unsere digitale Zeitung heißt eldiario.es.
Yo prometo practicar mi inglés si ustedes entran y practican su español leyéndonos.
Ich schwöre auch, dass ich Englisch lernen werde, wenn Sie Spanisch lernen und auf unserer Seite nachlesen.
Y en mi periódico he aprendido que la independencia de la profesión está directamente relacionada con las fuentes de financiación.
Aber in meiner gesamten Karriere habe ich auf jeden Fall gelernt, dass die unabhängige Berichterstattung ganz direkt damit im Zusammenhang hängt, wer diese unabhängige Berichterstattung finanziert.
A día de hoy nadie dicta nuestra línea editorial.
Bei uns, bei El Diario, ist es jetzt so, bis heute haben wir überhaupt niemanden, der uns reinredet.
La cúpula directiva está formada por los redactores, que a la vez somos también los principales accionistas.
Geschäftsführer sind wir, die Redakteure selbst, und außerdem sind wir auch gleichzeitig die Hauptaktionäre unserer Gesellschaft.
Somos jóvenes, tenemos tan solo un año.
Die Zeitung ist noch sehr jung, ist gerade mal ein Jahr online.
Pero a día de hoy somos un medio rentable.
Aber wir sind schon heute, wir schreiben schon heute Gewinn.
Tenemos 1.600.000 lectores
1.600.000 Leser
y casi 6.000 socios que aportan mensualmente una cuota de 5 euros para permitir que otras personas puedan leer nuestras informaciones.
und fast 6.000 Mitglieder, die jeden Monat einen Beitrag von 5 Euro zahlen, um zu ermöglichen, dass andere Menschen die Informationen, die wir ins Netz stellen, lesen können.
A quien paga esos 5 euros no se le da nada más que nuestro agradecimiento. Pagan para que otros puedan leernos. Y cada vez son más los que nos leen y también más los que pagan para que otros puedan leer.
Und diejenigen, die diesen Beitrag von 5 Euro zahlen, die kriegen sonst nichts außer unseren großen Dank. Der Dank, dass Sie es sind, die es ermöglichen, dass andere Menschen die Nachrichten, die wir schreiben, lesen können.
Como no quiero extenderme en este primer turno, si más tarde tienen interés les explicaré cuál es nuestro modelo de negocio y nuestra línea y cómo hemos conseguido crear un periódico influyente y que genera beneficios en tan poco tiempo.
Und weil ich in dem Moment jetzt auch nicht zu weit ausholen will, möchte ich Sie einladen, nachher vielleicht im zweiten Durchgang noch ein bisschen genauer in dieses Thema reinzusteigen.
Mientras tanto voy a intentar extenderme en los motivos por los que insisto en que creo que el periodismo en España y supongo que en toda Europa es hoy más necesario que nunca.
Aber das Thema, die Gründe, warum es überhaupt zu dieser Situation kam, in der wir jetzt befinden, das würde ich schon noch gerne ansprechen.
Yo vengo de un país en el que el presidente del gobierno no da ruedas de prensa.
Ich komme aus einem Land, in dem der Ministerpräsident eigentlich keine Pressekonferenzen abhält.
A veces, es cierto, convoca a los periodistas a una sala, ha ocurrido en varias ocasiones, en donde ofrece un discurso a través de una pantalla de plasma sin que nadie pueda hacer preguntas.
Ab und an lädt er die Journalisten durchaus in einen Saal ein. In diesem Saal sitzt man dann vor einem Plasmabildschirm und auf diesem Plasmabildschirm wird dann die Rede des Ministerpräsidenten abgespielt, ohne dass man natürlich Fragen stellen kann.
Los medios tradicionales, los grandes medios de comunicación que se resisten a la crisis y con sus números rojos insisten en realizar la cobertura de ese tipo de actos.
Und die traditionelle Medienlandschaft trägt dem auch noch Rechnung, indem sie hingehen und solche Veranstaltungen dann auch darüber berichten.
Nosotros no, nos negamos y bajo la premisa de lo que ya es un hashtag periodístico en Twitter que dice sin preguntas no hay cobertura.
Und wir sagen nein, wir gehen nicht hin und schauen uns diese Videoshow an von Rajoy, auch unter einem Hashtag, den es schon bei Twitter gibt, der da heißt, ohne Fragen keine Berichterstattung.
Creo sinceramente que los lectores del diario, que los ciudadanos españoles en esta difícil situación de crisis agradecen que haya periodismo que trabaje con esa libertad.
Und ich denke, dass die Leser dieser Berichterstattung, die wir bieten, dem auch tatsächlich zugetan sind. Die finden das richtig und unterstützen uns in unserer Haltung, eine solche vorprogrammierte Berichterstattung nicht einfach weiterzutragen.
Lo siguiente que yo les voy a contar, a mí la verdad me da un poco de vergüenza, porque son cosas que nos encontramos los periodistas en España a diario.
Das, was ich jetzt noch erzählen will, ist etwas, das mich schon auch etwas beschämt, denn das sind Dinge, die Journalisten nicht jeden Tag so in der Öffentlichkeit sagen.
Cada vez que uno llama a un gabinete oficial de un ministerio o de cualquier departamento del gobierno para contrastar una información, la respuesta más probable es ni confirmo ni desmiento.
Immer wenn man zum Beispiel bei öffentlichen Stellen, Behörden, Ministerien nachfragt, dann ist die wahrscheinlichste Antwort, die man dann bekommt, das kann ich weder bestätigen noch abstreiten.
Y el contexto es importante en todo esto porque hay muchas informaciones encima de la mesa.
Und der Kontext ist hier sehr wichtig, denn es liegen viele, viele Informationen auf dem Tisch.
Para que se hagan una idea, el tesorero, el hombre que maneja las cuentas del principal partido político en España, el Partido Popular, está a día de hoy en la cárcel.
Zum Beispiel, nur ein Beispiel, der Kassenwart der PP, der Spanischen Volkspartei, die jetzt gerade die Regierung erstellt, dieser Kassenwart ist bis heute in Spanien im Knast.
Este hombre está en la cárcel porque se han hallado en Suiza 50 millones de euros opacos vinculados a una trama corrupta.
Er ist im Knast, weil man in der Schweiz Gelder gefunden hat, ein Vermögen von über 50 Millionen Euro, Da gab es einen ganzen Fall, der aufgearbeitet wurde, aber eben nicht zu Ende, noch lange nicht zu Ende aufgearbeitet wurde, denn da ging es um Zahlungen an künftige Regierungsmitglieder, auch im Thema Bauwesen war da.
Esa trama está directamente relacionada con el partido del presidente del gobierno.
Das alles führt direkt zum jetzigen Ministerpräsident.
Investigado por cobrar comisiones de empresas constructoras.
Der eben von der Bauwirtschaft dicke Kommissionen verlangt hat, bekommen hat.
Para financiar al partido e incluso para enriquecimiento personal de algunos de sus miembros.
Um die Volkspartei PP nicht nur durch die Wahlen, sondern überhaupt zu finanzieren und darüber hinaus Mitglieder seiner Riege zu bereichern.
Maybe can I interrupt you there for a quick second, because we agreed on everyone having 5 to 6 minutes to introduce themselves. You're getting very detailed there already. It would be nice if the other people would also have the time to introduce themselves and talk a bit about that.
Pero voy finalizando ya.
Ja, ich komme gleich zum Schluss.
Con algún dato más y cierro mi primera intervención. Tenemos corrupción que afecta a la familia real.
Auch der Korruptionsskandal, der die spanische Königsfamilie betrifft.
Varios ministerios.
Etliche Ministerien.
Y hay una circunstancia en la política española que no sé si aquí en Alemania sucede. Allí nadie dimite, nunca.
Und in der spanischen politischen Landschaft ist es so, ich weiß nicht genau, wie es in Deutschland ist, aber in Spanien würde nie irgendjemand freiwillig zurücktreten.
Yo creo que es bastante difícil hacer periodismo en estas circunstancias.
Es ist schon sehr schwer, unter diesen Umständen Journalist zu sein.
Y finalizo ya con esto, pero creo también que son grandes momentos para el periodismo, al menos esa es mi opinión.
Aber diese Schwierigkeit bietet eben auch eine große Chance, das ist meine Überzeugung.
Yo que he estado en una gran empresa, en una de las principales empresas de comunicación de este país, descubro ahora un pequeño medio autogestionado por periodistas.
Ich, der aus einem der größten Medienkonzerne in Spanien rausgeflogen bin und jetzt in meinem kleinen digitalen Medium etwas geschafft habe,
descubro, como decía, el gran placer de dedicarme a esta maravillosa profesión.
Schaffe ich es auch wieder, den Genuss in diesem wundervollen Beruf des Journalisten zu finden und zu fühlen.
Y la enorme responsabilidad de un cada vez más amplio número de ciudadanos que nos mira y nos busca para encontrar la verdad de lo que les está sucediendo día a día.
Und auch die große Verantwortung, die spüre ich auch, die Bürger mit dem zu versorgen, was sie wirklich wollen, was sie wirklich brauchen, die Wahrheit. Und dass die Bürger diese Wahrheit auch vertragen.
Y si te parece, lo voy dejando por ahí y luego ya en el debate hablamos más.
Das war's.
Thank you very much for that impressive statement. We learned a lot. We learned that grave situations that can develop in countries in crisis can create immense creative potential. What Gonzalo and his colleagues did was founding an independent internet platform, a news portal, which has per day more than 1 million viewers. That's far more than large newspapers on the continent have subscribers. So that's quite an impressive thing. We learned about a grave job situation in a country in the 5th year of a crisis. Thanks very much. And we would like to continue now with our guest from Nicosia on Cyprus, Meropi. Please.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me here. This is a great event. My name is Meropi. I'm working for a daily newspaper in Cyprus. Please allow me to read out of my notes because I'm not very confident with my English. So, as some of you may already know, on the 16th of March 2013, the Eurogroup decided, after hard negotiations with the government of Cyprus, to impose a levy on deposits in the 2 largest banks of the island, which were Bank of Cyprus and the Laiki Popular Bank. For its implementation into a law, the decision should go through the Parliament of Cyprus. There was a plenary session, and the Parliament voted no to this proposal after a big demonstration that was held in the streets outside the Parliament. It was one of maybe 2 demonstrations for the economic crisis in our island. Meanwhile, all the banks in Cyprus were closed. On the 28th of March, a few days after the now famous decision for the haircut, a man stood outside the Bank of Cyprus in Nicosia holding a placard that drew everyone's attention. The placard read, "Why must international media be so greedy of horror scenarios? Is decent and investigative journalism dead?" At the time, indeed, the international media had been to Cyprus to report on what is happening on the island after the Eurogroup's decision. Therefore, this man chose to demonstrate on the day that the banks would finally open after being closed for 12 consecutive days. That was when the media turned their attention to the island, waiting for a big bank run to happen. But nothing happened actually on that day. No bank run, no shouting, nothing. People stood in line calmly waiting to take some money. And they were so calm it was almost annoying for the revolutionary ones. But this man's questions remain, and maybe it's the questions that we should try to answer to this panel. Why must international media and local media be so greedy of horror scenarios? Is decent and investigative journalism dead? At this moment, the Troika is pushing for the privatizations in Cyprus. This is the big debate now, which is actually not that big because the media don't give much attention. They just superficially go through, should we privatize or not, and don't go deep into this matter. One of the biggest problems in Cyprus is unemployment, which has reached 17%. And I think that's that.
The situation at the moment in Cyprus. Thanks very much. That's a very interesting story, and we should really talk about it later. Maybe you've got an idea about that as well. We all know that in television news, usually bad news are newsworthy, and good news are rarely reported, especially when it comes to television. That's an interesting thing. We should discuss that later. We've got two young journalists here, Kostas Kalergis and Tiago Carrasco. Kostas from Athens and Tiago from Lisboa in Portugal. Guys, here you go.
Let's start. First of all, I want to thank a lot the invitation to be here in this event, especially under a slogan of "Wake Up," since like the general sense in Portugal is that people are sleeping. Even if they think that they speak with the eyes wide shut, the general feeling is that we don't wake up for our reality. My name is Tiago Carrasco. I'm a freelance journalist, and I was doing the majority of my work in international reports work until like 1 year and a half, when I start to believe that it will be more important to take Portugal to the international stage, because of the situation that we were living there. In fact, I think that Portugal is, maybe with Cyprus, the country that is in crisis with less attention in international news. We are maybe because we are a small country, the only continental country of European Union with only one land border. In fact, I think the image that we have abroad is that we are the good student of Troika, the good student of austerity. And this is the image that the media in Portugal want to make Portuguese trust, and also the image that they want to take abroad, to here, to Germany, to the center, to the heart of Europe. It's true that we are maybe known as the soft Latins, that we did a revolution in 74 with flowers, one casualty, after 42 years of dictatorship. But it's not true that we are accepting what is happening in Portugal now. We are living a very sad situation. young people, maybe, or for sure, the most brilliant generation, the most educated generation in Portugal, is massively leaving the country. In this moment, the numbers, that's official, it's an average of 10,000 people leaving the country each month. The majority of my friends are leaving too. I seem to leave. The country is living like people wait that something changes, but in the atmosphere, the street, it's of very big depression. Especially if you leave Lisbon, because the country is very centralized in Lisbon. If you go outside Lisbon and Oporto, the feeling is that nothing happens. So if in Lisbon and Oporto still some opportunities can appear, some job opportunities, the feeling is that in the villages and the small towns is that there is no many hope that to find a job there or to have better life conditions. So people are leaving the country. And I think this is the biggest loss of all this crisis that we are living, is that maybe you can recover the economy, maybe you can recover from a political crisis, but you cannot recover from a demographic damage. This is like almost one generation that you lose, and especially because it's a generation where we invested a lot of money in education. And it's the feeling that we are having, is that we are losing that. Speaking about media, the media, we have we have 10 million people. It's a small country. I think we don't have so much media. We have 4 televisions, just the newspapers that you can have some credit, some reference. They are 4 or 5, and with the economical crisis, we are losing sovereignty because we are dependent of IMF, European Central Bank, European Commission, and the European Central Bank. So we are losing sovereignty in politics. We are losing sovereignty in economics because the major companies that were public are being bought by foreign states. For example, our energy company was bought by a Chinese company that belongs to the state, and I'm not patriotic, but it's very dangerous when you are privatizing very chirurgical companies to states that are not democratic. And in media, and this is a topic that I think I would like to alert, to do this wake-up call. Like, if we are sleeping, it's good to call someone to wake up us. Our media are being bought. 4 newspapers are already with huge shares of Angolan capital. That Portugal doesn't have a lot of moral to speak about Angola, because we were 500 years exploiting the country and even slavering. But what is happening now is that Angola is in a very good moment, and I'm just giving this example because I think it's the most notorious in this moment. With the entry of this businessman of Angola in the media, we arrived to a point that now the Portuguese courts start to investigate 5 businessmen from Angola, and as the media belong to the capital, to the finance of Angola, we put ourselves in our knees, and we had our foreign affairs minister asking sorry for investigating this Angolan businessman for corruption. What is quite hard to accept for the oldest country in Europe, or the country that has the oldest borders. So listening the speech of Gonçalo, I think it's very urgent to us in Portugal to start new projects like El Diario, since the massive media are totally controlled or by Portuguese biggest companies, always connected with banks and finance, or to foreign companies that are coming from countries that unfortunately are not democratic, what causes a huge risk in the future. So I believe I also believe that I have one of the most beautiful and important professions that exists. I'm very proud of it. I have hope, but I think that we need, in a very urgent way, to wake up and to start new projects, more independent in Portugal. And now I will pass to Costas Calderis.
Hi, my name is Costas Calderis, and I'm a journalist from
Not working. The microphone is not working.
It's the same microphone. Okay. So I've been working as a journalist for the past 10 years in Greece. I started working in news in 2003, and then I started working in a documentary series, mainly dealing with foreign news. And when the crisis erupted, or basically not erupted because it's not
Excuse me, Costas, I think we still have microphone problems there.
Okay, now.
Greece seems to be deeper in the crisis than Portugal. Try again.
Can you hear me now?
It's not working.
How come you answer?
Can we get it sorted, or shall we? Sorry, you're too far away. Can't you?
We have a microphone.
Okay, shall we just? Maybe you can just swap places with Vasak. Is that one working? Is yours working? Technology, gotta love it. So you guys killed both now. You guys killed both microphones now. Is this one still working? Keep it to yourself. Don't give it to anyone. Is that one working?
Is it better now? Yeah. So I was dealing mostly with foreign news, and in 2010 I started working in news and current affairs in the show in Krise's biggest private TV station. So basically I started getting more involved with domestic news, and after 1 year the crisis started going deeper and deeper in Greece, and the circumstances were not so favorable for me to work there. So I started working as a freelancer, and mainly I've been working with foreign media coming to Greece, covering parts of the crisis, or generally doing projects, TV projects and journalistic projects in Greece. And I'm also, as a freelancer, I have a lot of free time, so I'm trying to be a bit more creative with that, and I've shot 2 short documentaries. One is about a strike in the steelworks in Athens. It's the longest lasting strike in the recent years. And the second one is on show here in SPIELART, which is the Wake Up Call, and it's the story of 4 graffiti artists who do political graffiti in Athens, which is one of the nice things that the crisis have brought in Athens. It brought a lot of color and a lot of political messages, different ones with different political backgrounds. So I suggest you watch it. And right now I'm also filming a long feature documentary about the love in the time of crisis, basically exploring how the crisis has changed the way we fall in love, we have relationships, we flirt and we have sex, and we also investigate a little bit the porn industry and the prostitution. So concerning the media and the crisis and the media and Greece, I mean, I would split what I have to say in 2 parts. One is the Greek media. About that part, the Greek media is one of the sectors that have been very hurt, very influenced because of the crisis. Because It's the same like Tiago said. The media have been dominated by media barons, and it's by people who have other businesses as well, usually construction or other interests, and they are connected with the government in some way or the other. Usually it's a hidden way, but it's like everybody knows it. So basically when the crisis obliged the Greek governments to cut down on spending, that had created a chain reaction, and then these media started losing money, both from straight income, from public advertising there, but also from public projects and other things that were somehow connected in the transaction between the media and the governments. So the media climate was really bad. A lot of newspapers have closed. A lot of journalists have been working for months unpaid. A lot of there have been a lot of reductions and a lot of promises for no more reductions, and then they were followed by more reductions in the salaries and also layoffs. And this thing has been happening for the past 3 years. So basically, we have, several thousands of unemployed journalists in Athens, and one can imagine what are the consequences in the quality of reporting. If you would ask me about the reporting of the economic crisis in Greece from the Greek media, I would say that it has been on the surface. No big mainstream media station or newspaper has gone deep down and dirty with the economic crisis and what is behind it. No one tried to explain to the Greek people what has been going on. There has been for the first 1-2 years a new terminology entering our lives, and people had, they would had to learn this terminology, these economic terms about the spreads, about financial institutions, about rating companies. So people could not understand what was happening, and they could not have a decision or a clear opinion about what was going on. So I think this was one of the effects of the deterioration of the quality of reporting in Greece. Another thing is that the Greek media, the mainstream media, have stopped describing the situation that people were feeling on the ground. Most people, in most of the European countries, when you watch TV, basically you see an interpretation of what you're living, and you're okay with it because more or less it's like what you're going through. In Greece, this has stopped having a big connection. People would see on TV a totally different situation than what they were going through. Things were going, one TV station was talking about a success story about Greece recovering, and then in your daily life you see only misery or unemployment or debt. So this, according to a study that was carried out last year, about 60% of the people asked don't watch TV for learning the news. A lot of the people have turned into more alternative or independent media sources. I'll give you one example. Is a magazine called Unfollowed. So it's a group of journalists who have decided to set up this magazine of investigative journalism, and they have made clear that in order to state their independence, that they are not accepting advertisement from the state or from banks. So you can imagine that an initiative, in order to claim some credibility to the people, had to say that they don't want any advertisement from banks and from the state, which are two of the biggest advertisers in the country.
Alternative news sources can be an issue later, I suggest.
Okay.
Let's just try to get through the introduction.
Okay. And the other part to finish is how the foreign media have been. Or do you want to talk about this later?
Foreign media is something that we would definitely deal with later.
Okay. Just one more thing to mention concerning the media situation is that having all these things in the back of our mind, last summer the government decided to shut down the public broadcaster, which was one of the most I wouldn't say they were not independent, but they were balanced. You had all sorts of views there, and people who need to learn news in these times have felt a big difference now that it's closed.
Discussion about, thank you very much, discussion about ERT. I mean, we had that on German news as well, of course, in broad scale we saw that. Just mentioning, because neither of you didn't mention it, Tiago and Kostas are founders and co-founders of two very important internet blogs. One is called When the Crisis Hits the Fan, and the other one is Crisis Republic. I strongly recommend having a look at it. It's very interesting, and it's exactly a good example for alternative news gathering in times of crisis. Now, we're still in the introduction round, but we're getting to an end, and I hope we can start with the conversation then. Başak Ergil from Turkey, she does so many things. It's hard to actually put it into 2 or 3 sentences. Turkey is not an EU member, of course, but the discussion about the question whether Turkey belongs to Europe or the Arab world keeps going on since years and years, and probably will continue. Turkey is an associated member or a close part of Europe, closer than other countries anyways. Başak, what can you tell us about the situation of the media in Turkey these days when you guys are looking at the EU and the crisis?
Yes, thank you for having me here. I can say I'm coming from a culture and nation that's really waking up. So, and I'll tell you about the process of our waking up. But before that, I'd like Oliver to help me to arrange this file. And I have to move there, I think.
Do you have a microphone over there? I'm getting insecure. That microphone is working. Can she use this one? Or is the cable long enough? Thanks.
This one is okay. Thank you. This is the translator's solidarity that you see. I was given a seat by my colleague. Okay, I'm going to tell us about the media, and I'm here to represent Translate for Justice activist translation movement, which works in 16 languages now, and our motto is resistance in all languages. I won't be actually speaking about the economical crisis. I prefer to speak about crisis in general. And let me first tell you about the situation in Turkey and why we have set up this blog. This is a picture of our blog, Translate for Justice. Actually, maybe some of you have heard about the problems in Turkey and the Gezi Park resistance. But for those who do not know, I'd like to give a brief introduction about what happened regarding Gezi Park and what is Gezi Park actually. Gezi Park is one of the most important places in Turkey and in Istanbul. It's one of the oldest parks, and it is a place for people to gather, and it's a place for political activists to come together and start their demonstrations. It has had a very important place all throughout our history and our tradition of activism and tradition of resistance, because many Turkish political movements started in Gezi Park. So it's not just a group of trees, it's not just a part of nature, but it's a symbol of political organization and demonstration. The problem was the government decided to demolish this park, Gezi Park, and instead they would erect a shopping mall, which strangely all of the Turkish people resisted. it started just as a group of people going to the park and doing some reading and putting up tents and resisting against the demolition of the park.
Basha, can I ask you for a second? Sorry to interrupt. I think we're all very familiar with the Gezi Park situation because it's been on all major news programs. We all know what turned out, what kind of protest came out of that situation, and that it turned from a protest because of a, say, architectural plan into an anti-government protest and a revolutionary spirit within Turkey. I think you can skip that passage.
Okay, thank you for warning. So, actually, when the protest started, the city was like a war zone. Everywhere was on fire. There was tear gas and cannons everywhere, and people were dying and getting injured. And of course, we were all hoping to hear about this and see about this on the mainstream media, but it never appeared. And it sort of became a joke that people gave documentaries about penguins. So when the city was on fire, all we could see on the mainstream media was documentaries about penguins and, cuisine and so on. So on the maybe second or third day of the resistance, I decided to establish a translation blog where we could exchange information with other countries, other cultures, and where we could show our people how it is understood abroad, and we could show other people, foreign countries, readers, what really is going on here. So we decided to establish a blog, but the first blog that I initiated was Translate for Gezi. It was not Translate for Justice, but Translate for Gezi. And there were some students, especially translation studies students, who contributed largely to this event. So this activist translation movement owes a lot to those young students. Interestingly, I'd like to pinpoint one very important thing. Those students, some of those students, not all of them, but some of those students were students whose families did not allow them to go onto the streets, so they were sort of trapped at their homes, and they were helpless, and they wanted to know what they can do, how they can perform their activist deeds. And that's why they tried to contribute to Translate for Gezi activist translation movement. So it was sort of, instead of, doing graffiti on the streets or cheering on the streets or resisting physically, they found an equivalent of this resistance by translating for or translating about Gezi Park. In the meanwhile, on TVs we were still watching penguins. And then, of course, what the reliable source of information. Well, this was misinformation on mainstream media, and all mainstream media members were forced to censorship and self-censorship, and some of them have been fired so far because they didn't obey. And, there was also some pressure on social media, so we had to close the translation movement. We closed Translate for Gezi translation movement, and then some of the members agreed and accepted to start another movement called Translate for Justice, not restricted in content, with the Gezi events, because there were other such events, such problems shared by all people around the world. So now we're doing this new blog, which is about lots of other things. As you can see, this is a video, so we translate videos and texts and articles, all sorts of text types.
And it's an excellent example for another alternative source of news gathering for people who are interested in, say, news that do not occur on mainstream media.
Yes, there was silence.
Can I use translate for justice to start the discussion about, is mainstream media, maybe I ask you, is mainstream media not able to cover the EU crisis properly? I'm asking him. Yeah. Sure. Is the mainstream media, are the journalists within the mainstream media, we heard a lot about the difficult situations for journalists, but is the mainstream media able and competent enough to cover all aspects of the EU crisis?
Bueno, yo creo que es muy difícil mantenerse a los periodistas en una situación de crisis, y que el dato que ofrecía al principio de mi país, 10.000 periodistas en la calle, es una buena muestra de que es muy complicado.
Also ich denke, für Journalisten ist es in jeder Krisensituation eine Herausforderung. Und gerade das Beispiel, was wir jetzt gesehen haben, in Spanien würde ich gerne die Zahlen nochmal nennen. Seit Beginn der Finanz- und Wirtschaftskrise über 10.000 Journalisten, die einfach entlassen worden sind, entsorgt.
Sin embargo, frente a esa situación sí es cierto que en España estamos, como contaba yo antes, viendo cómo un importante grupo de periodistas cogen el dinero que han conseguido ahorrar tras los finiquitos de sus despidos y los invierten en la creación de medios de comunicación, y cómo sorprendentemente estas experiencias han tenido una reacción bastante buena por parte del público.
Aber es ist auch erwähnenswert, dass eben etliche Journalisten, die sich versuchen zu behaupten inmitten der Krise, ihren letzten Groschen sozusagen zusammengekratzt haben, investiert haben in sich selbst, in die Berichterstattung, die unabhängige Berichterstattung, und dass das vom Publikum dankenswerterweise wirklich sehr, 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 sehr gut aufgenommen wird.
Entonces, si la respuesta la tengo que hacer, y termino con esto, en términos cuantitativos, en números, en cifras duras, la respuesta es no, es prácticamente imposible sobrevivir en el periodismo en medio de la crisis. Sin embargo, hay otra lectura positiva, que es la cuantitativa, y es que un grupo de periodistas sí han conseguido hacer o empezar a crear un periodismo ilusionante de calidad a pesar de la dureza de la crisis.
Deswegen kurz gesagt, wenn Sie fragen, ist es möglich, innerhalb der Krise als Medien, als Journalistschaffender zu bestehen? Die harte Antwort ist quantitativ gesehen, also die harten Zahlen heißt, journalistische Arbeit mitten in der Krise ist fast nichts mehr wert im bisherigen Konzept der großen Konzerne. Aber qualitativ gesprochen kann ich sagen, eine kleine Gruppe von sehr tapferen, mutigen und auch beharrlichen Journalisten schafft es, sich zu behaupten inmitten der Krise und die Qualität dabei sogar noch zu steigern.
Quality is a very good, I don't know whether you can hear me now. Quality is a very good word and a very interesting topic within the context of the media crisis. Costas, you mentioned anticipate a decrease of quality in journalism, in reporting. What do you mean by that? Can you give us one or two examples for that? And can we borrow the microphone, please?
One example, I mean, a lot of the journalists who have been working in newspapers, in mainstream media, in TV stations, journalists have always been playing with the red lines. They knew that there are business interests, political interests, and they wanted to tell the truth. And most of the times They would go as far as the red line. They wouldn't cross it. Sometimes they would, but that's before the crisis. Because before the crisis, you could be fired from one newspaper and go to another and continue doing a good job. Right now, most of the journalists are terrified. The ones who have a job are terrified. They are not in any position to risk anything, this job safety, in order to do proper journalistic work. So I think that's one of the issues, this state of precariousness for journalists. It's a very important, it looks small, but it's a very important issue for journalists not to be able to do a proper job. Journalists have, in Greece at least, in mainstream media, have lost their independence and their credibility. If you ask, I think the majority of the people who watch the news, they don't believe what they hear. So, I think this is quite important to think about it. I don't know if you wanted a specific example.
I think that's a very good thought. I mean, which things can happen to journalism that are more grave than if journalists lose their independence? If you're dependent on someone, on donators, on money, you cannot write whatever your research reveals. So that's the worst thing that can happen to journalists. That's why I would like to ask Thiago, your blogs, again I'm mentioning them because I really think a lot of them, when the crisis hits the fan and Crisis Republic, can they provide additional information, independent information, and then again, how's the quality being guaranteed?
How is the quality being guaranteed? What do you mean? I don't understand.
Well, if you're publishing a blog, like if you're watching public broadcasters, media news programs, you at least know, well, there's some sort of quality check, even if the entire media house is under the suspicion of losing the independence, but there's still a lot of people working on it. A blog can be run by a single person.
I think it depends a lot of the people that you initially invite to write on the blog. So Costa, I think he invited Costa Leonardo, the Italian blogger that was also in the beginning of it. They invited journalists that they already worked with, that they know the work and that they know they will do an independent and clear job. So they are not connected with any political party, with any economical interest. And from that point, you can trust that you are going to have an independent voice writing in your blog. That's for me a big difference now that we are speaking, for example, about citizen journalism, that you can see a lot of platforms appearing. I think there is a big difference between a blog or a platform made by journalists and by citizens, because journalists have a background. They have studied or not journalists, but they have worked. They know the ethic code. They know the rules of this profession, and they can do a work that a citizen journalist. I think, of course, that there are exceptions, but that cannot do so deeply, because the border between journalism and activism is very thin. I just give one example. In the Portuguese national television, the public television, like 1 month ago, for the first time they did this American concept that it's a group of citizens went to the studio to make questions to the Prime Minister. What is, like, at the first sight, it seems like a very good concept, but who works in journalism knows that, at least in Portugal, the Prime Minister will never accept a challenge like that without knowing the questions previously. And I'm sure of that. If he does that with journalists, for sure that he does that with anonymous citizens. And the result was very easy answers for the Prime Minister, that also because the citizens were not ready to give a fast question after that, it was propaganda. What we saw in that night in the public television was pure propaganda, because it was so easy to explain and to put some sand in the eyes of the people, that he seemed a really clever person, which is not at all. So, like, the borders between citizen journalism and new platforms of blog and journalism I think they are very thin, and in the future we have to plan properly the kind of product that we have, because the problems and the lack of independence and discipline in the work can appear if you don't have the right persons working.
I think we all agree on the fact that there is more critical journalism needed, especially in times of crisis. Ralph, you mentioned that you're actually experiencing very few critical reporting in Ireland. How can that be? Why is that the case in Ireland?
Well, I think the situation is different I'm quite envious when I hear there's a blog at 1.6 million people read it. You don't have that, but you also don't have the protest movement as such as you have in other countries. Okay, we had a demonstration 2 years ago with 100,000 people, but apart from that, there's little happening. And although everybody knows and is fed up with the politicians, they still elect them. I mean, for example, one guy, Michael Lowry, like, he was convicted and everything, and because he'd taken money. And he was corrupt, but he was the first person to be re-elected. Ireland is a different voting system. It's sort of a bit like a football match. You watch the counting and that. He's the first one to be elected. People said, well, okay, he was corrupt, he took money, but he also blackmailed the government, so he got a new swimming pool, so he did something for us too. And the papers reflect that. You don't, of course you have blogs, and some very good ones, but they're more or less preaching to the converted, I think. They're read by people who are critical anyway, but there's no big discussion about it. I mean, okay, in Ireland you don't have the list system, so you can punish politicians straight away, even if it's the Prime Minister. He has to be elected, he can't go on a list. And what happened when the shit hit the fan, Fianna Fáil and the Greens were thrown out. But the result was that you have Fine Gael back. I mean, I won't go into the details, but they're basically the same. The only difference, going back to the 1920s, the Civil War, they were on different sides, but economically, politically, and whatever, they're basically the same parties, same corrupt parties. And the media reports and the official media, nothing has much changed. Sometimes I think they're just like the politicians. They're proud when Angela Merkel sort of has Ireland as a showcase, where her austerity measures allegedly work, which they don't. But Ireland is leaving the bailout system now in December, and it's very important for Merkel to pretend that it's a success, which it's not, of course, because we're going to pay for a long time. But the newspapers don't really reflect that people are different. I mean, that's a bit typically Irish. They have their own way of showing their protests. Sometimes it's quite funny, like when last year at the European Football Cup in Poland and Ukraine, you had a big group of Irish fans at Dublin Airport leaving for Poland, and they had a big banner where it said, and Angela Merkel thinks we're all at work.
Yeah, on Facebook.
Yeah, and but it doesn't. It's not reflected in either the voting or okay, we have a few more left-wing TDs now, members of Parliament. But the critical reporting in the papers is missing. We don't have that many newspapers, national newspapers anyway. But
maybe it's connected to the fact that in other countries the austerity measures of the Troika really created revolutionary spirits. I mean, we've seen Spain, we've seen Greece.
I know, and they should have done the same in Ireland, really, but they didn't. Because, okay, people were complaining.
So what are the Irish doing? Are they sitting in the pubs?
No, they can't afford it anymore.
Okay.
It's too expensive. Okay. No, but, the measures that the Troika took in Ireland were as harsh as they were in other countries.
Exactly.
And
does it have something to do maybe with the personality of the people? Meropi, we talked in advance of this panel You told me Cypriotic people are usually a bit introverted, and that could be an explanation why there are not so many protests. But there were protests on Cyprus, weren't there?
Yeah, there were some protests, but it really wasn't enough. We were really affected by this. I mean, seeing your money, and the other day it's vanished, but nothing actually happened. Nothing actually happened, and we don't have blogs like Spain and Greece, and we don't have magazines that are more critical. Everything is just really superficial. I mean, we don't give the wrong information, but we're not critical about it. And maybe one of the reasons is this, that the Cypriots are introverted. I think that's the case actually, because we never protest about anything. So
what about sorry, what about in Turkey? There's a revolutionary spirit, or used to be. And what about the media's roles in those kind of situations? I mean, Turkey doesn't deal with a financial crisis at the moment, but there's a strong crisis in terms of a political context. How does the media perform there? Is there enough critical reporting in Turkey?
Well, there have been some critical reporting, but actually we are on the top of the list of countries who have their writers and journalists in prison. I think we are the second in the world. So we're not that relaxed in publishing. I mean, our journalists are not that comfortable in publishing such things. And that's why, well, I couldn't actually conclude my speech, so maybe I should mention it here, it's relevant. Some translation movements popped out in Turkey. It was not just Translate for Gezi or Translate for Justice. There were also other translation movements. But even tweeters were detained. So it's not just the social media that's under pressure, it's also the journalists. So I don't think the mainstream media has played a good role. They didn't practice their professions. But we have some unions in Turkey. So the Union of Journalists, they had some press releases saying that there is no independence for the journalists. I think that shows something. So basically, 5 or 6 translation movements tried to perform the journalism, and actually I think I'm the only one who is not a journalist here, but we had to undertake that role. I mean, just with our instincts and with considering the necessities, the requirements of our present situation in Turkey. So we had to become journalists in a way.
Thank you very much. There's another thing that really lies heavy on my heart. When I was preparing for this panel, I was thinking about German Bild Zeitung and associated yellow press publications. You might remember it was a smear campaign what Bild Zeitung did towards the Greek. I think it's legitimate to say that. They were calling the Greek population one of the most historical, rich and intellectually wealthy populations and people of this continent. Die pleite Griechen, it was something about gyros all the time. You know, that was really, I think it was straightforward, unfair and campaign journalism. Kostas, was the German yellow press coverage of the situation in Greece monitored by you guys? Did you talk about that? Did you see it, debate it?
Not by me personally, but the Greek media have, I think they have devoted an exaggerated amount of time, of space in newspapers, of time on TV, and of energy in terms of journalists to cover that, because I think, I don't even remember who started it, but it was like a a table tennis game for some months with German newspaper covers, and then Greek media trying to answer to that. And quite often you would see that, for example, I don't know if you are familiar with the Focus magazine cover. Some of these media, even the Greek media that have tried to produce similar covers and titles, are not even popular. And I think it was more a game of almost nationalist game of nationalist pride, rather than anything to do really with the economic crisis. People were suffering from all these cuts, and the least that they cared was whether Bild called them lazy or not lazy. You know, it was. I think there was too much energy spent on that issue, but it definitely made good headlines, both in Germany and in Greece. It was a very sexy subject. Yeah.
In terms of numbers.
Yeah.
But I would like to ask one last question. We've got another 15 minutes left, so we need to come to an end. A question I would like to ask Gonzalo, actually. Mentioning the yellow press events that happened during the times of crisis, as well in Greece and in Germany, media plays a very important role. It is responsible as well for what develops in people's minds. Media and journalists are responsible for an atmosphere that is created. How can that be guaranteed? Sober, pure, honest reporting in times when media houses tend to fall into danger of losing their independence.
Sí. A partir de la entrevista, que la pregunta es... A partir de la pregunta es muy interesante y que debemos entonar el mea culpa a los periodistas. Es decir, nada de lo que ha ocurrido nos es ajeno y algunas de las circunstancias que rodean lo que ha ocurrido también son nuestra responsabilidad.
Also die Frage ist sehr, sehr interessant. Wir Journalisten müssten durchaus da auch ein bisschen das Mea culpa anschlagen. Denn nichts von all dem, was geschah, ist ja abgelöst von uns, losgelöst von uns. Wir sind Teil dessen, was geschah.
En los movimientos sociales que se han desarrollado en España, en el 15M, en la acampada en la Plaza de Sol en Madrid, que supongo todos conoceréis, el trabajo de los periodistas era visto con ojos muy críticos.
Bei den großen sozialen Protestbewegungen in Spanien, wie zum Beispiel die 15M-Bewegung, das Riesenzeltlager an der Puerta del Sol in Madrid, das werden Sie sicher gesehen haben, da wurde die Arbeit der Journalisten noch mit sehr kritischen Augen betrachtet.
Dicho de otro modo, los ciudadanos que bajaban a la calle le estaban mandando al periodista el mensaje de ya no nos fiamos de vosotros, o no, al menos no lo hacemos al 100%. Sí, que digo que los ciudadanos que bajaban a la calle para manifestarse le estaban enviando a los periodistas el mensaje de ya no nos fiamos de vosotros, o al menos no al 100%.
Also diese Bürger, die da auf die Straße gingen, die im Zeltlager waren, haben den Journalisten auch ganz klar die Botschaft gesandt, wir glauben euch nicht mehr. Diesen Konzernberichterstattungen vertrauen wir nicht.
Llegados a este punto, creo que es el momento de que los periodistas establezcan un nuevo contrato con sus lectores.
Jetzt sind wir, glaube ich, da an dem Punkt, an dem es Zeit geworden ist, dass die Journalisten ein neues Bündnis mit ihren Lesern schließen.
En el caso del medio en el que yo trabajo, hemos intentado hacerlo a través de una herramienta muy sencilla, que es hacer públicas nuestras cuentas, de dónde vienen los ingresos, cuáles son los porcentajes e incluso los salarios de cada uno de los trabajadores de la empresa.
In unserem Fall, also bei El Diario Es, haben wir das auf ganz einfache Weise geschafft. Wir haben es nämlich so gemacht, dass wir große Transparenz 100%ig gewährleisten. Wir legen unser Budget offen, wir legen unseren Einnahmen offen, wir legen sogar die Höhe der Gehälter der Mitarbeiter offen.
Y creemos finalmente, con esto finalizo, que si ofrecemos la información y quien la lee sabe de dónde proviene nuestra financiación, esa información pesará mucho más.
Und wenn wir also diese Information losgelöst von der Angst vor einer möglichen Finanzierung oder vor einer Kürzung der Finanzierung bieten können, reine Informationen, dann bin ich sicher, sind wir auch vertrauenswürdig.
Del mismo modo, a través de Twitter, Facebook o las nuevas maneras de comunicarse, el periodista y el lector tienen ahora un canal de doble dirección, de tal modo que el lector siempre puede establecer con el periodista una relación de queja, propuesta o enmienda cualquiera de las cosas que se plantean en el medio de comunicación.
Denn jetzt mit den neuen Medien wie Twitter, Facebook und so weiter ist es keine Einbahnstraße mehr, nicht mehr die Medien zum Leser, sondern die Medien zum Leser und der Leser zum Journalisten. Man kann sich austauschen, man kann Anregungen bekommen und das garantiert eben auch die Erhöhung der Qualität.
Por eso, y ya sé que finalizo, creo que más que lectores, lo que tienen que tener los nuevos medios de comunicación son comunidad de lectores y estar verdaderamente implicados y responsabilizados con esa comunidad.
Deswegen denke ich, dass mehr als nur Leserzahlen muss der neue Journalismus, die neue Medienlandschaft eine Art Gemeinschaftsleserschaft haben, in der eben auch man gemeinsam für die Qualität dieser Berichterstattung Verantwortung übernimmt.
Quality of coverage seems to be in all the countries a high concern. Everybody's concerned about the quality of the journalism. Ralf, we need to come to an end now, but if I'd be a good fairy and ask you about what you wish for journalism in Ireland in context of the crisis, what would you wish for?
Well, it's quite easy. We'd be more critical. I mean, the Irish media work in a framework that does not ask radical questions. It looks at the little steps and says, well, here we're doing well, here we're not, and Merkel likes us now, and today she doesn't. But there's no radical question asked. Like, I mean, for example, why pay back the money? I mean, the same for Greece. Why do they still demand the money? I mean, it's not a matter of survival of the euro at all. I mean, the Greek economy is about the size of Hesse, you know, and nobody would say that Hesse would put the euro into danger. It's a matter of principle, but nobody asks the question. You have the blogs in Ireland, and there's some very good ones, but they're not widely read, not as wide. I mean, you can only dream of a colleague here saying about his readership and that. You don't have that. And the mainstream media, the newspapers and television, do not ask fundamental questions, you know. They can be critical towards some politicians sometimes, you know, but they all work within the agreed sort of framework, agreed by politicians and the media, and I think that is a pity. And although you do have critical journalists, of course, also in the mainstream media, but they're the exception. They wish there'd be much more.
There can be much more of that.
Absolutely.
You mentioned Greece. Let's pass it over to Kostas. Kostas, journalism in Greece. We're talking about different issues. You guys are very much concerned about the job situation for journalists as well. If you wish for something within the next 1 or 2 years, we know the crisis is not over within the next 12 months. What would you wish for? What is your greatest wish for journalists in Greece?
To stick to their values and to serve the public interest. That's the most important thing. It doesn't have to do with how much money they will earn at the end of the day. I think you can serve your profession even if you're an unpaid journalist if you stick to these values.
Tiago, how can you guarantee sticking to ethics and values if you're struggling to survive?
I think it's you have to get rid of that idea, that stability, and maybe like that idea that we had 10 years ago of having like some kind of life. I think we should forget it in this moment, and that I speak about Portuguese journalists and try to get stick exactly to these values, because if money is something that you cannot have now in our field in Portugal, at least the values are something that you can grab. And there are some people that are some journalists that unfortunately, and I don't criticize them because it's hard, are forgetting this the things that they fall in love for this profession, and it's something that we cannot fall in this mistake. There are new things appearing, crowdfunding, new forms of funding of create original and new things. You can be a freelancer and start like a concept, a project, and go after it, still keeping the independence. And I think that's our way, the way that we have to follow in the future.
Would that be a model for Turkey as well? journalism, it's a different country, different crisis, but journalism under threat there as well, as you mentioned. Freedom of speech under threat, as you mentioned. What can be new forms of journalism that could guarantee a higher standard in Turkey?
Well, it's a very hard question. Nobody could answer it so far. I think alternative media will be in charge for a long time in Turkey. Not the mainstream media, but alternative media. So all I can wish for is about the alternative media, more translation or journalism movements, more activist movements, and as an outsider, because as you said, we're not in the European Union, as an outsider, I should say that Turkey is playing now a very great role in starting new channels of new media, like these translation blogs which became international, and now we have lots of translators from lots of different countries. So Turkey is trying to say something or perform something or do something. So I hope people in Europe, all sorts of people in Europe, could maybe contribute to this or be in solidarity so that we have a media, maybe not in nations, but across nations. Like we're trying to build a language, a discourse, or a counter-discourse across the borders. So as an outsider, I could say there are some things, more humanitarian things, across the borders, outside the borders, and maybe Europe could recognize this and be a part of this. And happily I can say Translate for Justice movement has drawn attention of lots of people from different countries. So all I can say about Turkey is mainstream media will do what they have done so far, but maybe unions could work more. Unions like journalists' unions could work more, and in the meanwhile, alternative media will be in charge. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Milopi, last question to you today. You told us there haven't been so many people taken to the streets in Cyprus, but I know about April this year. That was a big one.
Yeah, that was a really nice thing. There was this great concert. It was almost 12 hours, and it was called Cyprus Aid. And it happened just a few days after the events of the Eurogroup, and we collected food and things that people would need in this difficult time. And it was very successful. Half the Cypriots came to Nicosia on that day. It was really nice.
The funny thing is, even that big event wasn't really in the mainstream media that big. I mean, I saw it, but I didn't see it like in broad perspective. And it was such an extraordinary event.
Yeah, actually it was.
It was in
Cyprus. It was covered as a big event in Cyprus. So okay. We have hope.
We have hope. Maybe that's a nice last sentence for this discussion.
Yeah.
It is a very complex, very difficult situation we have in Europe. We could talk for hours and hours probably about journalists, their roles in democracies and countries in crisis times. But I think the message of the day is, everyone on this podium actually is a good example for that, is that we need to build bridges, be it by translating documents, translating videos, be it by using art to transfer messages into the international community, create awareness for each other. Just keep in mind it's 28 countries and 500 million citizens. And just ask yourself from time to time, how much do we actually know about each other? Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.